The NFL season kicks off tonight between the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles. And yes, the spread might be a lot, but the fantasy football season also kicks off tonight. So we need to get into it, our first start and sit video of the season. Let's get into this video right here on Blitz Fantasy Football. What's going on, everybody? I'm Blitz Link, and today we are going over the Week 1 start and sit guide. Obviously, these are my three favorite players to start at each position and my three favorite players to sit at each position based on all my research. If you want to go check out my rankings, go check out blitzsportsmedia.com to see where your player stacks up and use our start and sit tool, which is also free as well. Let's get right into the quarterback situation here. My first start of the week is Trevor Lawrence, and you couldn't ask for a better opening matchup for Lawrence. Carolina was the worst defense in the NFL against quarterbacks last season, giving up the most fantasy points to the position, while also allowing 35 passing touchdowns and 40 total scores to the position. Obviously, we know that Trevor Lawrence has some new shiny weapons in Travis Hunter on that offense as well. You get a new head coach in Liam Cohen, who was very successful with Baker Mayfield last season in Tampa Bay. And Trevor Lawrence has had success in week 1. He's topped 22 points in two of his last 4 week 1 matchups. The Carolina Panthers are a nice, easy way for Trevor Lawrence and this new Liam Cohen style Jaguars offense to ease into the 2025 season. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be in for a nice week. No, he doesn't have that elite rushing upside that we look for at the quarterback position, but the passing efficiency is another metric that we look for. And in week 1, Trevor Lawrence has that against the Carolina defense that I think is going to be pretty rough again this season. I think Lawrence should be able to cash in for a good matchup for us. The second quarterback I'm going with is Kyler Murray. And yes, Kyler Murray is one of the most frustrating quarterbacks in fantasy football. He had multiple 25-plus point performances, and then he had multiple performances where it was the QB 18 or lower last season on a weekly basis. It's one of these matchups against the Saints you just can't ignore. The Saints struggled mightily against quarterbacks last year, ranking 6th worst in terms of passing yards and 2nd worst in terms of rushing yards allowed to the position last year. Murray last season averaged 33.6 rushing yards, and 3 of the last 5 quarterbacks to face the New Orleans Saints that were rushing quarterbacks top 59 yards on the ground. So everything is suggesting that Kyler Murray should be in for a beautiful matchup against the New Orleans Saints, and I can't avoid those numbers. I'm going to go with Kyler Murray this week. Yes, he frustrated us so much last year, but the matchup's way too good to ignore right now. Kyler Murray is a must-start this week in fantasy football. The next guy is Drake May, and Drake May is a popular sleeper among the community right now, and rightfully so. He averaged 18.7 points as a starter in games he finished last year, and he also ran for nearly 37 yards per game, which I just mentioned is above Kyler Murray. It would have been 5th best among the NFL over the course of a full season. Obviously, May opens week 1 with a new group of tackles in New England, a weapon in Stephon Diggs he didn't have last year. Travion Henderson is now in that backfield. So the New England Patriots did a lot to help around him. Now in week 1, he gets a Raiders defense that is really, really good for quarterbacks. They allowed the 3rd most points to the position last year. They do have a solid front, even though they ranked bottom 12 in pressure rate last year. But their cornerbacks are going to be Eric Stokes and Q Kelly, who should be very easy for Drake May to pick on in week 1. I love the rushing upside. I think he's going to have an efficient week. Drake May should cash in as a starter for everybody's lineups. Quarterbacks, I'm sitting Justin Fields. I know Fields is a guy that I'm really high on, and long-term, yes, I think he's going to be just fine due to his rushing upside. Hasn't historically been great in his 3 last straight openers, under 17.6 fantasy points, and then he gets the Steelers, his old team. It's a good storyline, but it's not a good matchup. They were one of the toughest defenses among running quarterbacks in 2024. Lamar Jackson only had a total of 62 yards against the Steelers last year, and they were the 4th fewest rushing yards to the quarterbacks in general last season. The Steelers have been very, very good against running quarterbacks, and then their secondary got a big upgrade. They added Darius Slay and Jalen Ramsey to go along with Joey Porter, so the secondary looks pretty good this year. The New York Jets are in for a tough matchup, especially without Vera Tucker to open the season at their guard. So I'm kind of fading Fields in week 1. Yes, I'd probably start Trevor Lawrence over Justin Fields this week. CJ Stroud is the next guy, and I'm kind of just fading Stroud in general this year. The Texans did make some upgrades to the receiver position that should help him long term, but the matchup stinks and the offensive line is still a concern for me. He just topped 20 points once over his last 13 games. The Rams defense finished top 10 in quarterback pressure rate in 2024. We know that their offensive line is now missing Laramie Tunzel, but they already had the second highest pressure rate in the NFL last year without him. They're replacing him with Cam Robinson and Ariante Arsay at the tackle positions. Who knows what we're going to get out of those guys? Robinson looked like he took a step back when he was on the Vikings towards the end of last year. The Rams secondary isn't the best in the NFL, but I think the pressure rate in the offensive line with no running game right now in Houston is going to give CJ Stroud some problems. My final sit of the week, and it is Jared Goff, and it's because of his track record at Lambeau Field. He's averaged just 206 passing yards, 13.4 fantasy points per game over his last 3 trips. That's not very good, guys. And I know some of those are in the frigid temperatures of Lambeau, but I think the Packers have done a good job of at least limiting the passing game against the Detroit Lions. Typically, it is a run fest for both these squads, and the Lions have come out on top as of late, but the Packers do match up pretty well against them this year. The Packers were also pretty tough against quarterbacks in fantasy. 6th fewest points last year to the position. They had Micah Parsons, should increase their pass rush, as they were one of the worst teams in pass rush win weight last season. Win weight, I can't talk, but I think the Green Bay Packers are going to be making a statement this week, and Jared Goff is not going to be on the right side of it. I think Goff and the Lions are going to have to run the ball effectively. And there is one good matchup on receiver that I like, but I think that Jared Goff is going to be in for a down performance in terms of passing yards. And with no rushing upside, I am fading Jared Goff this week. All right, getting into our next group here, we have the running backs, and the first one is TreVeyon Henderson. Now, I know some of you guys are going to say, oh, RB3 on the depth chart, he's not going to play much. That's just far from the truth. Ramondre Stevenson, yes, he's going to have a solid role and play a majority of the early down work, but TreVeyon Henderson might just be one of the top 5 most explosive players in the NFL. He honestly is a baby Jahmyr Gibbs, baby Jamal Charles, however you want to slice it. And he is going to be their primary third down back for New England. And obviously, with the New England offense and Josh McDaniels' history, we've seen a lot of third down backs be very viable in fantasy football with their PPR touches. Enter the fact that the New England Patriots opened up against Las Vegas, who really struggled against running backs last year on the receiving end and the rushing end. I think TreVeyon Henderson doesn't need 16 to 18 touches to be good. I think he needs 10 to 14, and he's going to be in for a 14-plus point performance just based on his explosiveness alone. He is going to have the most designed plays in New England, and he's going to cash in on that. DeAndre Swift is my next guy, and I haven't been super high on DeAndre Swift this offseason, but with how everything is falling for him in Chicago, it looks like he's going to be in for a nice start to the season. He's had over 1,300 scrimmage yards in each of the last 2 years, and while it hasn't looked pretty, he's been the main bell cow back for the Chicago Bears. When he played for Ben Johnson in Detroit, he saw 70 targets in 2022. And Roschon Johnson and Kyle Montague are currently banged up for the Chicago Bears. So what are we going to get? It's going to be DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift played 20 of 21 possible snaps with the first team with both those players out. Swift is going to be in for a major workload. I know the Vikings were good against running backs last season, but their nose tackles shifted, and they're both really bad against the run. I think this Vikings defense is going to have a little bit of holes in terms of the run game, and DeAndre Swift could be a solid play this week. The next guy is Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard, yes, he plays the Denver Broncos. Yes, they were really good against the run last year, but I really like what Tony Pollard can do, especially with Tyjae Spears out. When he was out last year, he averaged 18.8 carries and 3 receptions a game and 15 PPR points per game with Spears out. The Denver defense against receiving backs alone allowed the 9th most receiving yards. I think that in PPR formats, Pollard is a gotta have him in your lineup type of guy. The Titans are going to have to rely on their run game, especially with Calvin Ridley being blanketed by Pat Surtain. I think Pollard's going to be in for a nice day this week. As far as running backs, I'm sitting. Breece Hall is the first guy that I am sitting this week. Listen, Breece Hall is just going to be in for a rough season. It's not going to be, he could be efficient, he could be effective at times, but with the way this shift is going, and I mean, the rumors of the Jets wanting him to trade him, it doesn't seem like he's going to have the role that we expect Breece Hall to have, especially with where we draft him. Obviously, the Elijah Vera Tucker injury does not help him, but the split is what I'm concerned about. And then Pittsburgh's defense is incredibly good against the run, ranking 11th best against running backs last year with limiting explosive plays and holding opponents to the 10th fewest rushing yards per game. Expect Breece Hall to be in for a down week 1 this week, sorry. And then our next guy is Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt for the Washington Commanders. Bill has been a late rising fantasy superstar, a ton of headlines right now, but I really think that he's going to be in for a small workload to open the season. While, yes, I'm high on TreVeyon Henderson, despite being listed as the team's RB3, I think with Bill, it's legit. We saw Chris Rodriguez take snaps before him in terms of the preseason roster. Bill never really played with the first team. And then Jeremy McNichols comes back from injury. If he's going to play, he's going to be ahead of him as well. Austin Eckler is the primary third down back, so you don't really have to worry about that. So it's interesting. I think he could play a little bit, but to see him get 10 potential carries, I don't think that's likely to happen. And it's too risky in week one to throw him in your lineup and just hope he takes over the, main share of that Washington Commanders backfield this week. I don't think that's a realistic thing that we should be betting on. Nick Chubb is the next player. And obviously, Nick Chubb is in a great situation to start the year. Joe Mixon goes down with injury. Chubb automatically slots in as the team's RB1. Last year, though, wasn't really good returning from injury. Only 3.4 yards per carry. In his career, he averaged 5.3 yards per carry. Sure, he's a year removed now from that injury, and he should be a little bit healthier. I don't think he's going to be around that 3.4 range this season, but I think he could still be hovering right around that 4 range. The Houston Texans offensive line, like I mentioned earlier, is not the strongest unit, and I fully expect Chubb to be splitting a lot of time with Dameon Pierce, potentially mixing in with guys like Woody Marks and Dare Ogunbowale to start the season. And the Rams last year, their run defense has improved. So I'm not sure I'm buying into Nick Chubb in my starting lineup this week. Let's get into the receivers here, and it starts with Emeka Egbuka. Egbuka's stepping into a prime role for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week one with Chris Godwin and Jalen McMillan sideline. Kate Otton's also banged up for them. He's going to go, but that doesn't affect anything with Emeka Egbuka. He automatically slots in as that elite second target behind Mike Evans, and it's great news because this Atlanta defense gave the most points up to receivers in 2024, while also ranking top 5 in touchdowns and catches allowed to slot receivers. Egbuka is going to open up in that slot, and obviously he can play a little bit on the outside once Chris Godwin returns as well. Egbuka's got to have him in your lineup this week type of guy. Next guy is Jerry Jeudy. And yes, Jerry Jeudy struggled against the Bengals last year despite their defensive woes, but this is more about the fact that Joe Flacco's under center. The Bengals defense did not improve their secondary from last year, and I think he's due for some positive regression against their division rival. In the second half of 2024, when Sean Watson wasn't their starter, Jeudy ranked 15th in target share, 20th in yards per route run, and second in receiving yards per game, only behind Jamar Chase last season. Joe Flacco, we know, is going to sling that rock around, and I fully expect that Jerry Jeudy is going to be in for a big game against a weak Bengals secondary. Our next player is Jameson Williams. I think Williams is poised to build on his breakout season last year, where he finished wide receiver 23 in points per game. His efficiency metrics were much better than that. He was 15th in separation and 23rd in yards per route run. Obviously, the new offense is going to shift, and we'll see what his usage is going to look like. But this is more about who the Packers have on the outside at cornerback. Keyshawn Nixon and Nate Hobbs really struggled last year, allowing over 66% completion percentage and an over 97 passer rating in coverage last year. Williams is going to primarily operate on the outside of the formations, and that should be a big day for him, considering the fact that he has those matchups the entire day. And like I mentioned with Jared Goff, I do think he can have some success throwing the ball to Jameson Williams, but outside of that, I still am not trusting Goff. I'll trust Williams, though, in my lineup this week. As far as wide receivers to sit, I alluded to him earlier, and it's Calvin Ridley. I think Calvin Ridley is a clear week one fade with Pat Surtain likely shadowing him in the Broncos secondary. Surtain shadowed 7 receivers last year and didn't allow more than 54 yards to any of those wide receiver ones, holding 6 of them to under 40 yards. Cam Ward is making his debut against an absolutely loaded Denver defense, so it's going to be a tough task for him getting the ball downfield to his wide receiver one, who's going to be having a significant amount of eyes on him outside of Pat Surtain as well, with how weak the Titans receiving group is behind him. I think it's a risky play to play Calvin Ridley in week one just based on the matchup alone. The next guy is Chris Olave. Concussions aside, it's brutal to see what he has to go up with this year with Spencer Rattler, a quarterback who posted more interceptions than touchdowns last year and averaged 6 air yards per attempt. Obviously, the Cardinals are a tough defense too. They were 9th fewest in receiving yards, 4th fewest in fantasy points to outside receivers last year. Will Johnson's added to that secondary now. Chris Olave's talented, guys, but the situation is what it is. It's a tough week for him in this Saints offense. The next player is Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp's no longer that elite wide receiver one that he once was, and he's now second fiddle to Jackson Smith-Njigba in Seattle right now. And I think JSN staying in the slot, Kupp's going to be thrown on the outside where his numbers were slightly better in terms of separation, efficiency, stuff like that. But it's hard to buy into him when, after back-to-back seasons under 2 yards per route run. That's not very enticing for me. I have my concerns about Sam Darnold working within this Clint Kubiak system, but we will see what happens there. Kupp is more of a guy I want to see this week. Can Cooper Kupp elevate his play versus where he was at the second half of last year. I don't think he's worth throwing in your starting lineups right now, even though I see some people doing it. Just don't do it. See what he gives us in week one. If Cooper Kupp looks much better than he did towards the end of last season, sure, we could consider him as a starter, but I am not trusting that considering with what we saw with Cooper Kupp towards the end of last year. Let's get into the tight end position now, and we're going to start with Tyler Warren, one of my favorite sleepers of the entire season. Warren is an absolute dog. He finished with his college career ranking top 3 at the position in yards per route run, missed tackles force, yards after catch, and all those stats are going to translate to the NFL very well. Daniel Jones being inserted as the team starter significantly helps him in terms of his week-to-week production as well. It also helps him potentially have a few more goal line packages that were designed for Anthony Richardson that Tyler Warren can instantly slot in for himself. The Dolphins were, below average in terms of guarding tight ends last year, 12th most fantasy points allowed, 10th most missed tackles after the catch, with Josh Downs and Michael Pittman drawing some defensive attention. I think Tyler Warren is going to open his NFL career up with a really solid performance against the Miami Dolphins. David Njoku is our next guy here. Listen, the Bengals allowed the second most points to fantasy tight ends last year, fourth most yards, second most touchdowns, but that is not what I'm most excited about. It is the return of the best quarterback and tight end connection in the NFL for fantasy football purposes, Joe Flacco, David Njoku. When they were together, they averaged 18.2 fantasy points per game with a 24% target share, which is absolutely absurd. Listen, pair these two together. The Bengals are already a weak matchup. David Njoku is going to go absolutely ballistic this week for the Cleveland Browns. Should be an exciting game. And then the final tight end is Hunter Henry, a similar guy that has a good connection with his quarterback. In Drake May's full starts last season, Henry posted a 19.2% target share, averaged nearly 50 receiving yards per game, and it finished with 11.3 PPR points per contest, which would have put him at the tight end 8. The Raiders have given up the fourth most fantasy points to tight end per game. They allowed over 1,100 yards to the position last year. This is going to be an absolutely great game for Hunter Henry this year. So I think that Hunter Henry, sleeper for the entire year, but week one against the Raiders, got to have him in your starting lineup. Tight ends that I'm sitting this week, and it starts with Evan Ingram. The Titans were actually really good against tight ends last year, allowed the second fewest points to position at 7.98 and just 636 receiving yards for the entire year to the position. Evan Ingram struggled against the Titans defense last season as well, only finishing with 4 catches for 33 yards. The Broncos are projected to basically blow out the Titans in this game, so I fully expect this to be a run-heavy approach from the Broncos in this one. It should lead to less volume for Evan Ingram. I think he's a dud waiting to happen in starting lineup, so I'm avoiding him this week. Next guy is Colston Loveland. I like Colston Loveland long term. He's a great player. I think he's going to be a really good player for the Bears, but I don't know how effective he's going to be in week one. The Bears pass catchers seem like they're very occupied right now. And then you have Cole Kmet, who's playing a significant amount of snaps with the ones in the preseason. Vikings were around the middle of the pack last year in terms of coverage of the tight end position. I just don't know if I could buy into a guy that could play 50% of snaps, only get 3 targets this week against the Vikings defense that's been okay against tight ends. Can't do it with Colston Loveland in week one. Our next guy is Zach Ertz, and Zertz surprisingly put together a steady 2024 season, finishing as the tight end 10. But the New York Giants, similar like the Titans, didn't, have very good numbers across the board, but against tight ends, they were really good. 4th fewest receiving yards and 3rd fewest fantasy points against the Giants last season. Ertz has a little bit of volume risk with Deebo Samuel out of the mix. Looks like everybody in Washington is going to be healthy this week, so that slightly downgrades him. I don't think Ertz has much of a ceiling this week, so I am avoiding him in my starting lineup. Let's get into the nitty-gritty here, the defense and the kickers. As far as defenses go, Arizona Cardinals versus the New Orleans Saints, already talked about it. Spencer Rattler is free money this year to start defense to get my favorite teams to stream against this year. The Los Angeles Rams are my second team. Elite pass rush win rate last year, paired against a really bad offensive line. Should be a nice day for this Rams defense. Defensive sits, the Bills and the Ravens. We both know when these teams go head-to-head, a lot of points are happening. They're both defenses you start on a typical week basis, but this week when they're playing each other, avoid them at all costs. As far as kickers go, I think Chase McLaughlin and Will Lutz both have really good matchups this week. And then kickers, I'm sitting Jake Moody and Cairo Santos. Well, folks, there it is. The first week one start and sit advice video. Make sure you drop a comment below with any start and sit questions you will have this week. Hit that subscribe button for more Blitz fantasy football content, and I'll catch you guys next time.